There are places where hope hides in the cracks of the pavement, and the improbable seems the only way forward. In a small town forgotten by time, one man dared to dream bigger than folks were comfortable with. Mark Foster, an engineer with a restless spirit, never accepted the limits set by those who can't see beyond the obvious. But his days were marked by suspicious glances, muffled laughter, and doors slamming shut on his surprising ideas. He was told his vision was impossible, that changing a community's fate was a pipe dream. Amid the scorn from experts and the isolation from his own neighbors, Mark had to make a choice: give up and stay quiet, or fight with everything he had for what he believed in. What no one knew was that behind the simple walls of his house, surrounded by parts scattered across an old backyard, an idea was taking shape, one capable of saving lives and inspiring an entire generation to never again accept the weight of others' doubt. Follow the journey of someone who turned failure into faith and loneliness into a legacy. Mark Foster was born and raised in Elmsfield, a small town deep in South Dakota, known more for its vast fields than for promises of innovation. At 42, his simple appearance hid watchful, restless eyes. Slightly graying hair, always a bit messy, a face weathered by the sun, and hands calloused from hours of manual labor. The son of retired teachers, Mark grew up in a modest home filled with old books, tech odds and ends, and stories of unlikely triumphs. From a young age, his curiosity got him into trouble. He'd take apart radios, clocks, even the neighbor's water pump, almost always to the shock and irritation of the adults around him. Fascinated by understanding how things worked, Mark earned a degree in mechanical engineering from a nearby university before returning to his hometown. The pace of life in Elmsfield was too quiet for his restless mind. His makeshift workshop, attached to his parents' house, became his sanctuary and lab. There, among screws and wires, he shaped projects no one else in the area dared to imagine. However, each new invention, whether a tractor running on recycled oil or a homemade solar oven, was met with wary glances from those who viewed anything new with suspicion. Mark worked for years at the local water company, keeping his job more through his knack for fixing old pumps than through any warmth from his colleagues. Between spreadsheets and rusty pipes, his frustration grew as he saw families lose entire crops due to the lack of clean water. The water crisis hit Elmsfield hard, and Mark despaired, realizing almost no one believed in solutions outside the conventional box. He managed his loneliness with long walks through the fields, where he scribbled designs in grease-stained notebooks. In town, he was seen as a dreamer, someone always closer to the next wild idea than to everyday reality. His family, though proud, worried about his growing isolation and the financial struggles that piled up with each new setback. Mark, however, felt driven by something bigger, determined to show that impossible is only impossible until someone tries. Few childhood friends remained. Many had moved to bigger cities, while others were lost in the routine of rural life. Mark found a sort of invisible community in his father's old books and in online forums for anonymous inventors, where he shared doubts, got advice, and collected distant but inspiring stories of overcoming challenges. His greatest fear was time. He felt the years slipping away quickly, as if every day his invention remained unfinished was another mark of failure in the world's eyes. Despite the discouraging outlook, Mark had a sense of responsibility he couldn't ignore. He felt called to solve the water problem, not just out of pride, but because he knew every delayed solution could cost lives. The project for an innovative purification system, unlike anything that existed in the region, began to emerge slowly, inspired by self-taught studies and risky homemade experiments. Even amid mounting debts and skeptical looks, Mark didn't give in to pleas to quit. He saw the workshop not just as a workplace, but as a trench against hopelessness. His hands, though tired, kept testing, failing, taking apart and rebuilding. And every night before falling asleep, he'd look out the window at the silent fields, convinced the solution was close, even if only he believed it. Mark's routine took a dark turn when, after years of dedication, the local water company decided to let him go, citing budget cuts. The news was a harsh blow. Besides losing his only stable income, he felt rejected by the very community he desperately wanted to help. Gossip quickly spread through Elmsfield. There goes Mark again with another one of his impossible ideas, ramping up the pressure and deepening his isolation. His family, while trying to be supportive, couldn't hide their fear about the overdue bills and the uncertain future. Amid the frustration, Mark chose to pour all his energy into his big project, an affordable water purification system made with simple materials, capable of turning contaminated water into drinkable water. The initial tests, done with repurposed parts and old bottles, failed one after another. The constant failure chipped away at his self-confidence, making the workshop a place that swung between hope and deep disappointment. Every now and then he'd hear his mother say things like, "Mark, maybe it's time to let this go," words that cut deeper than any outside criticism. The small town soon labeled Mark the water nut. Kids made fun of his trips to the scrapyard. Teenagers mocked his posts on internet forums. When he presented his idea at the local university, he watched it get shot down by professors and experts, who called the project unfeasible, both technically and financially. That night was marked by humiliation and the heavy silence in the car on the way home. This situation took a heavy toll on Mark's emotional health. He started avoiding social contact, diving for hours into old manuals, looking for inspiration wherever hope remained. The days dragged on between failed attempts, sleepless nights, and increasingly frequent arguments at home. The distance from his sister, who lived in another city, became unavoidable. She no longer hid her disappointment over the lack of progress and the family's financial struggles. Despite the critical situation, rare moments of empathy surfaced amidst the coldness of the locals. A childhood friend, Jane, a teacher at the town school, showed genuine concern. Venting, Mark told her about the weight of rejection and the constant fear of never being taken seriously. Jane encouraged him to keep going, but even so, the doubts kept growing. Each new failure deepened a feeling of absolute loneliness. The dream of seeing the town prosper and restoring dignity to his neighbors was developing deep cracks. The severance money quickly disappeared on parts, materials, and bills, and Mark started depending on his parents' help just to eat. In the quiet nights, he asked himself if maybe the biggest mistake hadn't been believing he could actually save anyone. Distant friends became just sporadic contacts on social media. The encouraging messages, once frequent, dwindled as time passed with no results. Even the inventor forums became uncomfortable. Their stories of others' success amplified Mark's sense of failure, and he hid his own unsuccessful experiments out of shame. The spark in his eyes gave way to deep dark circles and the restlessness of insomnia. Still, in moments of desperation, he reread old letters from his father, who often repeated a striking phrase: "The world's great inventors usually started out by being laughed at." Inside, he felt torn. Part of him wanted to scream to the world that he wouldn't give up. Another part, stunned by shame, considered abandoning the project and taking any simple job in another town. But the image of children carrying buckets of unsafe water always came back to his mind, reigniting the spark of resistance. The greatest suffering, however, was emotional. Mark felt disappointed in himself, afraid of letting down those he loved and of not living up to his parents' generosity. Looking in the mirror, he no longer saw a visionary, but a tired man struggling with his own limitations. And in this spiral of challenges and pain, only one conviction remained. Either he would change his story now, or he would disappear into anonymity forever. Determined to break the cycle of defeats, Mark established a strict routine, waking up before dawn to take advantage of the quiet house and dedicate himself, without interruptions, to the project. He put up a board on the workshop wall where he noted hypotheses, calculations, and improvements based on previous mistakes. He spent hours consulting scientific articles, tutorial videos, and forums, searching for new ideas, testing every detail in makeshift prototypes. This relentless search brought a new perspective. He realized the solution might lie in simplicity, not complexity. So, he adapted the plan to use more accessible materials like special sand, activated charcoal, and recyclable parts, believing that any genuine breakthrough would only be useful if it could be replicated by other needy families in the region. One day, he asked Jane, the teacher, for help involving the elementary school students in small tests of the system, combining education with practice. Together, they launched an extracurricular project about the water cycle, allowing the children to closely observe the experiments with homemade filtration. The young students' interest became fuel for Mark, who felt re-energized realizing his idea could, at the very least, inspire future inventors. These early results were still far from ideal, but they brought small joys. A cleaner glass of water, the pride in Jane's eyes, a sense of belonging within the school community. Despite the renewed enthusiasm, the process remained full of difficulties. Many tests failed brutally. The water stayed cloudy, connections leaked, and the tight budget limited any bolder improvements. At times, he thought about selling his bicycle to buy a better lab filter but decided to hold out and find creative alternatives. He ingeniously used parts from an old fan, coffee filters, and PET bottles in his experiments, convinced that limitations could breed innovation. Financial struggles forced Mark to take on small odd jobs around town, fixing farm equipment or helping farmers with harvests, always setting aside part of his earnings to buy testing materials. Contact with the residents, despite the lingering prejudice, allowed him to hear first-hand accounts of the hardships they faced. Sick families, barren fields, children missing school due to the daily search for water. Empathy for these stories made his own list of failures seem smaller compared to the urgent need to keep trying. As the months went by, small improvements began to happen. The makeshift filter started removing strong odors and reducing visible residue. Mark celebrated every advance, no matter how small. A clearer glass, a number closer to the target in his home tests. Jane, excited, shared the progress with other teachers, and soon invitations came to present the idea at community meetings. Although many still doubted, some adults started contributing materials or offering words of encouragement. A new challenge emerged from this: pressure. Every step forward was closely watched, with growing expectations and eyes ready to criticize any slip-up. Mark felt the responsibility weighing on his shoulders, but he used this pressure to study even harder, reviewing every stage of the project, seeking support in international forums. One night, he received messages from an expert in Mexico who offered to review the technical diagrams in exchange for sharing experiences. This contact brought valuable insights, revitalizing the project once again. Despite the setbacks and the lost sleep, Mark's tenacity was palpable. With every fall, he grew more resilient. He learned to value negative feedback, turning it into fuel to find new answers. Bringing the community together, he started demonstrating his experiments outdoors, encouraging parents and children to participate and understand that knowledge was collective. Slowly, the walls of disbelief began to crumble. At the peak of the improvement process, Mark celebrated a personal victory. Using homemade methods, he managed to get the system to eliminate 98% of the most common bacteria in the local water. This milestone not only proved the invention's effectiveness but also rekindled his family's enthusiasm. They rallied behind him again, celebrating the inventor's tireless dedication. It was a step forward, and Mark knew there was still a long way to go, but he was no longer alone on his journey. Summer brought one of the worst droughts in Elmsfield's recent history. In early July, wells dried up completely, and residents walked miles to the nearest river, already low and polluted, to fetch water. Amid the suffocating heat, an unexpected storm caused a flash flood, washing debris downstream and contaminating the scarce supply with sewage and agricultural runoff from the fields. If you're enjoying our journey, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss out on more stories narrated right here on our channel. Within hours, dozens of families were left without access to clean water, and cases of infection began to appear, especially among children and the elderly. At the height of the crisis, the town declared an emergency and advised everyone not to consume water without boiling it. But for many poor families, even that wasn't feasible. Mark, shaken by seeing serious cases emerge among his neighbors, knew this was the chance, or the risk, to put his system to the real test. Alongside Jane, the teacher, he visited affected homes, distributed the first prototypes, explained how they worked, and closely monitored the results. Initially, he faced distrust. For many, trusting their family's health to a homemade invention seemed like a last resort born of desperation. Anxious, Mark spent sleepless nights checking bacteriological levels in samples of filtered water in the makeshift lab at the local school. The fear of failure was overwhelming. Any mistake could cause irreparable damage to his credibility and, worse, to people's lives. One morning, while delivering a new kit to the family of a sick boy, he saw the look of desperation and hope in the mother's eyes. That hit him hard. Everything he was, not just as an inventor but as a human being, was on the line right there. Tension mounted when the first reports from the school indicated a sharp drop in cases of diarrhea and infection among students whose families were using the handmade filter. Within days, rumors swept the town. Something in Mark's experiments actually worked. The activity around his workshop intensified. People knocked on his door, asking for guidance, more filters, suggestions for other problems. Mark was torn between gratitude and fear, feeling the weight of each decision twice as intensely. At the peak of the mobilization, however, a tragedy nearly shattered everything. A distributed filter had a mechanical failure and didn't remove all the impurities in an isolated home, leaving a child sick. The news spread insecurity, fueling old voices of doubt and suspicion. Mark, devastated, collected all the prototypes, worked relentlessly to identify the flaw, and corrected the assembly methods and instructions. He faced heated meetings where he was forced to defend his idea publicly against harsh accusations. At that moment, it felt impossible not to give in to despair. Silent tears fell during the nights he waited for results from the new tests, feeling threatened with losing everything he had gained. He sat countless times before his parents, unsure whether to apologize for risking lives or thank them for not giving up on him, even in the most extreme adversity. But solidarity also emerged. Sincere testimonies from families already benefiting who looked after their neighbors, reports from parents grateful for their children's improvement, the renewed trust of Jane, who tirelessly defended the project's importance to everyone. Gradually, the community began to realize that challenges and errors are part of the path for anyone trying to change reality. Turning inward, Mark found strength in the pain to correct, adjust, improve, and move forward. Days later, he returned to the community center, now renewed, and presented the improved filter, showing lab tests and success stories. At the end of the meeting, exhausted instead of laughter, he heard a round of applause echo through the room. In that moment, Mark finally felt the weight of doubt replaced by respect. At the climax, tears gave way to smiles, and the eyes that had seen so many years of failure shone with a certainty that, at last, something was truly changing, both inside and outside of him. After the whirlwind of intense weeks, life in Elmsfield began to reorganize. With the filters rebuilt and tested under strict quality control, Mark started training members of local families to assemble and maintain the parts, always prioritizing the simplicity of the process to ensure the community's autonomy. The work bees organized with Jane's help became weekly events. Fathers, mothers, young people, and even children helped assemble, clean, and distribute new purification kits. The most immediate result was noticeable in the data collected by the school teachers. School absences dropped drastically, and cases of waterborne diseases became rare, marking Mark's invention as a watershed moment in the town's history. The system's success reached the ears of state public health institutions, and after technical visits and rigorous analysis, invitations came for Mark to present his innovation at forums and conferences on access to safe drinking water in vulnerable communities. He, who was once ignored or ridiculed in academic circles, was received with respect and genuine interest. The first trip out of town, heading to a state university, was filled with anxiety and pride, not just his own, but that of everyone who had believed in and participated in the project. With the recognition, partnerships began to emerge. A local company offered industrial space to improve the production of the filters. An international NGO specializing in water and sanitation helped fund the project's expansion to neighboring towns. Mark brought in former colleagues and started training young people from the community in the fundamentals of basic engineering, fostering knowledge and offering new future prospects for many who had already given up dreaming. At home, the change was palpable. The relationship with his parents was rebuilt on a foundation of respect and pride, and his sister, once a fierce critic of his insistence, became an ally in logistical organization. The family atmosphere, previously heavy with uncertainty, now celebrated Mark's dedication and maturity. The inventor himself transformed his worldview. The time he spent seeking recognition was replaced by a desire to share knowledge and multiply solutions. The workshop, once a symbol of isolation, became a meeting point for collective learning. Mark's emotional strengthening was visible. Others' disbelief no longer hit him with the same weight. New obstacles were now seen as natural opportunities in the creative process. Faced with each challenge, he found himself calmer, more confident, and willing to listen to opinions, without compromising his convictions. This maturity shone not only in his eyes but in the generosity with which he now shared his discoveries, supporting other dreamers searching for their own space. The external impact solidified. Elmsfield made state newspaper headlines for overcoming the water crisis in record time, becoming a benchmark for community innovation. Other towns began replicating the model, inviting Mark to advise similar initiatives. Returning from anonymity to the center of the discussion on access to safe drinking water, the inventor began to be consulted by engineers, politicians, and researchers, always reminding them that the greatest secret of his invention was, in fact, the willingness to never give up. The school where Jane worked established an annual invention festival, encouraging youth leadership to find creative solutions, even beyond the issue of water. Mark was always the guest of honor, getting emotional at each presentation of models and prototypes made by students inspired by his journey. The town changed. It was no longer known just for its fields but became a symbol of perseverance and resilience. Throughout this journey, Mark understood the value of waiting, of mistakes, of time, and above all of community. Overcoming the challenge brought not only tangible achievements but also a profound internal transformation. He learned to listen without surrendering to pessimism, to insist without arrogance, to witness that hope and hard work together can indeed change the world from the most unlikely place. From humiliation to recognized leadership, Mark's greatest victory wasn't the invention itself, but the courage to persist, and to transform each wound into a starting point for even bigger dreams. When we remember great inventors, we often applaud only the final result, forgetting the winding, and almost always lonely path that leads them to innovation. Mark Foster's story, in all its simplicity and strength, invites us to look beyond the prototypes and medals. It invites us to see the value of quiet persistence, the courage to stand tall even when faced with the disbelief of everyone around. Mark had every reason in the world to give up. He was fired, isolated, ridiculed, and carried the weight of doubt on his skin and in his heart. He had to deal with the fear of disappointing his family, with looks of compassion disguised as pity, and with a feeling of failure after each unsuccessful attempt. How many of us haven't felt tempted to abandon our dreams in the face of apparent failures? How many times have we accepted the labels others impose on us, just because it seems easier than continuing to fight? However, it's precisely in those days when everything seems lost that true miracles begin to take shape. Mark understood, often through tears and exhaustion, that every great innovation is born from the insistence of someone who refuses the obvious. He found support in friendly hands, in honest conversations, in the rekindled hope in the eyes of those who benefited from his work. And step by step, he saw not only an invention emerge but a small revolution in mindset transform his community and himself. At the end of this journey, what remains is not just a more efficient water filter, but a powerful message. You don't need to be applauded from the start to deserve respect. You don't have to be understood by everyone to be right in your struggle. The path of visionaries is almost always lonely and painful, but it is also this path, trodden in the darkness of doubt and rejection, that forges humanity's greatest achievements. Each of Mark's failures was, in reality, a rehearsal for a new step. Each sleepless night, a silent lesson in resilience. Each no he heard, a lesson to move forward without being contaminated by pessimism. Seeing his town reborn, Mark realized that all his pain made sense. He saw himself as part of something bigger, an agent of change where before there was only discouragement. And perhaps this is the invitation of this story to all of us. Whether you are the water nut, the ridiculed dreamer, or the invisible inventor, persist. What makes you different is probably what can change everything around you. Maybe people only see the result when everything works out, but only you will know the value of the sleepless nights, the sideways glances, and the courage to keep going. The transformation of the world always begins with a no, transforms with a maybe, and is cemented with a yes that was born almost impossible. Courage to try again. Hope in the face of doubt, work despite exhaustion. In the end, like Mark, discover that the greatest legacy isn't what you create, but who you become while creating it. And may your story, like his, inspire many others to never give up, because that's what the world needs most. People who believe even when no one else does. Thank you for being here with us on this journey. Your presence and support mean the world, and it's what inspires us to keep sharing these stories. We're grateful to have you as part of our community. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments. Your voice makes all the difference. Let's keep exploring these journeys together. If this journey resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to explore more narrated stories on our channel. And remember, share this video with anyone who loves discovering powerful, unexpected stories.